Hello and welcome to Wind Energy Updates webinar, How to Diversify Your Business into the US Offshore Wind Industry. My name is Adam Minkley. As you may know me already, the organizer of the Offshore Wind Market Development Conference USA, which is to be held on May the 10th, 11th and 12th in Boston. This webinar is one of several pieces of work we're doing in conjunction with the Boston Offshore Wind Conference to promote the US wind industry and the opportunities within it. The conference we are organizing brings together 250 offshore wind executives to address the key challenge, which is how to develop profitable utility-scale projects for North America's offshore wind industry. We're excited to have confirmed C-level speakers from Cape Wind, US Wind, Fisherman's Energy, Res Americas, LeadCo, Statoil, Vattenfall, and many more to cover the following themes, which are how to plan and develop successful offshore wind projects, identifying cost reduction potential, developing supply chains and infrastructure, how to engage with partners, collaborators and stakeholders, and policy and financial frameworks needed to support offshore wind in the US. We would like to welcome you all to attend the conference also, so please check out the event website at windenergyupdate.com/offshore-USA. So moving on to the webinar, there are over 700 of you signed up today, so thank you very much for the great response and thank you in advance to our panelists for their time today. The webinar will last for 35 minutes and is being recorded, so please, so we will send you the full audio recordings and presentations in the next couple of weeks. We have 3 short presentations followed by, there will be no Q&A. Due to time constraints, we won't have time for questions with the listeners. However, I want to bring your attention to the chat box. If you have any questions for the speakers, please type them in the chat box and we'll ensure that they're answered as part of the post-webinar materials that we will release in the coming weeks. So I will now introduce you to Chris Willow of BVG Associates, who will lead today's webinar, starting with a presentation about the company characteristics that project developers and Tier 1 suppliers will be looking for in the US wind market. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Adam, and yes, nice to be speaking to everybody here on this webinar. So over the next 10 years, the offshore wind market is going to see strong growth and support the development of a dynamic supply chain. And this presents a great opportunity for US companies to diversify. But I think what this is, this conference coming up and what this webinar is about helping you guys think, have you got what it takes to win business in this sector? So when Adam and I conceived of this webinar, we thought about it as a means of sharing some of the best practice from the European established industry to US companies, to really just share some of the lessons learned from myself as a consultancy working with a lot of companies in the UK and Europe, from 3Sun, a company in the thick of things in installation and operations and maintenance, and then Universal Foundation as one of a pioneering innovator that's really gone a long way down the path of bringing a really important innovation in foundations through to market. So industry friends of ours, and we're pleased to have them on the webinar, and I hope that it will be really useful for companies out there in parallel sectors looking at the offshore wind industry as an opportunity moving forward. But first, before they speak, I'd like to start with a 10-minute presentation by myself, really thinking about what are project developers and Tier 1 suppliers going to be looking for in the US wind market. Very quickly, just to kind of give you a bit of context about why you should be listening to me about this. As I said, my name is Chris Willow, and I've been in the offshore wind industry for 8 years, having originally come into the industry, having worked for a major ports group. We, BVG Associates, we're an offshore wind consultancy. very strong experience in the European offshore wind market, and also we've been working in the US offshore wind market since 2011. We've worked with hundreds of companies in Europe and the US in this area, helping them understand how to approach offshore wind, the wind industry, and how to grow their business. The majority of work that I do is in business advisory, and so helping people think about the offshore wind industry strategically, but we also do work in terms of economics. I'm thinking about the socioeconomic benefits and the technology costs, and then the kind of dirty hands technology work as well. So we've worked with many companies. This is just a kind of smattering of them, but companies big and small and internationally and all over the place. And the final thing before I start is I just want to flag up on our website, if you're coming into the industry, there's a lot of information that you're going to want to gather, and on our website we've got a library of reports that we've prepared over the last 7 or 8 years. That's really an excellent beginner's guide for offshore wind. So with reports ranging from the most simple, just beginner's guide, through to much more technical stuff. So I definitely recommend you having a look at our website. It's all for free, so do have a look there. So my 4 lessons are going to be about the company characteristics that I think project developers and tier 1 suppliers will be looking for. And this is very much based on my experience working with both project developers and tier 1 suppliers, looking down, and also working with companies looking up and them building up their opportunity. I think the first thing I'm going to say is don't wait for the opportunity to come to you. Experience really counts in this industry because mistakes and delays are particularly costly in this industry. So companies, developers and tier 1 suppliers want to know that they're going to be working with people who know what they're doing. And obviously this is a bit of a catch-22 for people coming into the market, because you need experience to get work and you need work to get experience. And it's not easy, but it's an important thing to recognize that this is a reality of the market. The obvious thing to do to address this situation is to get out, find opportunities and understand what's needed. And this may take some time, but it's important to get right, and it's a really necessary step. If you're a Massachusetts or a Maryland company and the first time that you submit a tender to do offshore wind work, when it's all come to your patch, if it's your own state project, then you're probably not going to be competitive, because you're not going to have been through that process of thinking about what's needed and what's necessary. If you've identified an activity in the offshore wind industry that's an opportunity for you now, then don't wait for your state's project to happen. Go and look to other markets. In the US, as a kind of a bit broader, but particularly the Europe, where the industry is up, it's running, and actually that will give you the chance to be up there and going. It's particularly important because the US isn't yet fully operational yet in terms of a functioning offshore wind market. So it's going to take a little while to get going. So ideally, by the time that your local project does come around, if you've done this and not waited, then you should be knowing who to speak to, what to do, and it will just be part of your wider pipeline. My second lesson is the big guys are focused on procurement procedure. From my experience of working with companies in the European market, a common issue is the amount of work companies need to do to even be able to pitch for work with a developer or tier 1 supplier. And the problem is, these big companies, the developers and the tier 1 suppliers, are typically utilities, global energy companies or international conglomerates, and they have their procurement procedures that are in place, and they can't make exceptions. Maybe around the edges on really small stuff, but for anything substantial, they're going to have wanted you to go through a procedure of vetting and pre-qualification. At this stage of the US market, the exact requirements for this process are still unclear, and we're currently looking into the standards and pre-qualification requirements that are likely to be needed. But you can be assured that this process is likely to be fairly expensive, quite challenging, and fairly time-consuming. Having said this, once you've gone through this procedure, these companies are going to want to use you. Just as you've spent time in this process, they've spent a lot of time getting you through the process. So once they're comfortable about your company, once they're thinking about what you're doing, they're going to want to develop you, push you, and use you as much as possible. Out of this process, I think the next lesson is suppliers need a cost-out mentality. There's been really strong reductions in the cost of offshore wind energy over the last 10, 20 years already, but we are an industry that's going to be dependent on public subsidy for at least the next 10 years. The fact that projects receive funding from the public funding is not an excuse for inflating costs. It's actually the opposite. There's need for public funding for our industry is a risk to our medium and long-term sustainability. So there's a lot of industry focus on getting costs down, and if you're going to join the industry, you're going to be part of this. Importantly, getting cost out is not just about cutting your margins, but about challenging yourself to do things more effectively and finding opportunities to cut costs. I'm aware that players from the onshore wind industry will be particularly used to this kind of approach, where suppliers are typically expected to find year-on-year reductions. Obviously, this is a challenge, this cost-down mentality is a challenge that may deter some. But as I was talking before, the big Tier 1 developers and Tier 1 suppliers who have spent time getting you into their systems and who are going to be asking you to get this cost out will be working with you and will be sharing their insights and advice and supporting you in that process. So you're not necessarily going to be going alone. In addition, getting your costs lower obviously makes you more competitive to win more work in the rest of the market. So this process does make sense. My final point is going to be aware that the offshore wind industry has its own culture. The offshore wind industry has a number of parents, particularly onshore wind and offshore oil and gas, but also aviation, construction, shipbuilding, kind of just to name but a few. And it's tempting to think that if you're in one of those parallel sectors, that it's possible just to come in and you'll click right in. But really, the offshore wind industry has taken aspects of each of these industries, but then built up its own culture and approach based on the specific technical and commercial challenges that it faces. For example, there's a much greater focus in offshore wind on reliability than onshore wind because of the cost of downtime. And there's a focus in offshore wind on serial manufacture of large structures compared to the massive one-off builds of offshore oil and gas. And so in the offshore industry, we have our own language for our own names for components and processes that might be different to yours. Now, I'm not trying to make it sound like we're in an exclusive club, but I'm trying to encourage you, if you're coming into the industry, to do some homework before meeting with your customers. As I mentioned, we've got a library of information available for free on our website, and I think it's important to do that research beforehand. And I think if this helps you build rapport with your customers more quickly and helps you understand their priorities, I think it'll be time well spent. So those are my 4 lessons. I think that there are hundreds others, and always keen to talk to people and share these. I think this is an exciting time for the US offshore wind industry, as it's just about to, as it's kind of passed through the very early stages, and now it's starting to build up, and the messages and future is starting to clarify. So it's a good timing for people in parallel sectors to be thinking about how your company fits in. Do get in touch if you've got any questions through Adam and or directly through our website. But I also look forward to meeting many of you at the conference in May, as I'll be attending and doing a workshop at the beginning of that, focused a bit more on the basics of offshore wind and a kind of a beginner's guide introduction. So that's all of me. I'm now going to be passing on to Willie from 3Sun, who's going to be talking about some of his experiences as well.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Can I just check, Adam and Chris, can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not able to look at my PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to rely on Adam to flick through some slides as I talk through my presentation. My name is Willie Dawson. I am the founder and original owner of a company called Dawson Energy, which is part of the 3Sun Group. We have been involved in the onshore industry in the UK for about 15 years, and have transferred from supplying our services to the onshore industry to the offshore industry. And Chris has asked me to point out some lessons learned from going through this process. You should be seeing a slide of our group structure, which comprises 6 business units. Today I just wanted to really talk about the Dawson Energy part of our group, which predominantly involves the offshore wind and supply of services to the offshore wind industry. The next slide should be showing our locations. We're a UK-based company with offices also in Norway and in Esbjerg in Denmark, and we predominantly serve the UK offshore market as well as the Danish and the German offshore market. So we have if we could move forward to the slide showing lesson 1, which is pre-mobilization. The key part for difference for the pre-mobilization part of our services, we predominantly present services, provide personnel for the installation and maintenance of wind turbines. So for pre-mobilization for us, it's vital that we organize our technicians in advance of being deployed to offshore projects. If we have around about 150 specialized wind turbine technicians. For onshore work, we have to, we can provide technicians to our project. If there are any documentation missing, any bits of PPE missing, perhaps we can organize it there and then. Perhaps they start on the project a day later. But for offshore working, we have to tie in with boat transfers, which may only be going out to projects once a week or once a fortnight. So it's vital that all documentation is, for our ops team, we have a very heavy period in advance of mobilizing technicians to make sure that we have the right competency of the technicians we're deploying in relation to the scope of work that's required. All of the training has to be in place. It can mean that one training document which is missing can hold up a boat transfer, or it can mean that nobody transfers until the following week. And the logistics for our ops teams require us to deploy technicians to ports anywhere within the UK, anywhere with for the German industry, or some of the German ports, or to Denmark as well. So whereas onshore, we get some leeway with mobilizing technicians. If we have some paperwork missing, perhaps they can stay on project and do some other tasks. If anything's missing for offshore, they just don't even make it to the project. Going on to slide 2, which is lesson 2, the working environment, comparing onshore to offshore. It is the basic preconception is that when we move to offshore working, it's a much tougher environment. It's offshore, it's heavy sea states, everything's going to be much harder, but it's actually not always the case for our technicians. Onshore, we tend to be working on the top of mountains a lot. We're working in rain, we're working in mud, difficult conditions for vehicles. We have offshore, it tends to be a cleaner environment. The technicians are based on hotel ships, they're based on installation vessels, or they're based on the wind turbines. There is, for suppliers such as us, we began supplying our services by providing extra remuneration for technicians to work offshore because of the perceived difficulties there. But actually, the working environment, the hotel ships really are like hotels now. The conditions are quite often cleaner and more favourable than onshore, so that side of working offshore is not always more difficult. There is a requirement, you could say, for all personnel offshore to have a sort of greater degree of maturity and responsibility. When if they want to down tools, if they're fed up with their project, they can't simply jump in their car and go home. They're going to be out there for up to 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So we need some level-headed technicians who are mature and responsible in that respect. Going on to lesson number 3, the weather impact. Obviously, when we go offshore, we can encounter all sorts of bad weather, which has a huge impact on project progress. The onshore, when we're doing installation work, the main weather impact comes from wind speed. It is difficult to operate mobile cranes for lifting components if the wind speed is too high. We have that also in the offshore sector, but we also have the added hazard of the sea state. Working with difficult sea states, a lot of motion on the vessels. So what we have experienced transferring from onshore to offshore in terms of weather. Often the weather can be quite okay for working on the vessels, preparing components, or for working on the wind turbines which have been installed, but the difficulty comes when we're transferring technicians from the boats to the wind turbines, or from the transfer vessels to the hotel vessels. Moving technicians between them can be difficult. So and there's a whole industry has grown up about developing safer and better, more efficient vessel transfer systems for working offshore. And moving on to lesson number 4, which I've entitled Returning to Onshore Work. This, of course, this webinar is about the transition to offshore work. It's worth noting that one of our challenges as a supplier who serves both the onshore and the offshore industry is that when offshore projects are finished, perhaps if there are no new offshore projects and we need to face back into the onshore industry for work, this is quite a challenge for companies such as ours. The work onshore is basically harder work than offshore, which people find surprising when they think everything will be tougher offshore. But for technician work, it's often harder onshore. It is, as I said, there is different type of weather elements. The work offshore tends to be very fixed scopes of work for technicians. They will be delivered to a turbine to carry out specific functions. They'll be dropped off by a vessel with the tools are required for that job. Once that's finished, they will sit there and wait till they transferred to another turbine or back to the hotel vessel. Whereas working onshore, when technicians finish one job, they will be expected to jump into a vehicle, go to another part of a project, help another team of technicians. It could be doing a completely different scope of work then. Also, onshore work tends to have less pay for most technicians working onshore. There's no offshore uplift, of course. And also the offshore rotations have become much more favourable to onshore rotations. We are now used to working on most projects for offshore work on rotations of 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, whereas onshore, often for installation work, tends to still work for many companies around 4 weeks on and then one or 2 weeks off afterwards. So that's it's quite a challenge for companies such as ours to move technicians back from offshore work to onshore work, and it's also a reason why some companies have developed dedicated offshore divisions, dedicated onshore teams as well, so that they don't have to have this difficulty of transferring technicians. So to summarise with the sort of key lessons learned from the transition from onshore to offshore, the sea state, the environment offshore is tough, but it's not always necessarily tougher for technicians to work there. The facilities offshore have improved greatly in terms of hotel ships and what is an offer to the technicians there. The preparation for ops teams to deploy technicians offshore, it's crucial that everything is done properly in advance, otherwise they simply won't get deployed offshore, which has commercial impacts for all parties concerned, our clients, ourselves, our technicians. And again, key challenge is also returning technicians back to onshore work. So I hope that goes some way to giving an insight for a company such as ours, on an established company on the supply chain for our type of services, how what we've experienced with the transition from onshore to offshore.
Thank you very much, Willie. I'd just like to introduce you to Kristian Ravn. Over to
Hello.
you, Kristian.
Yes, and soon you'll see my presentation as well. My name is Kristian Ravn. I'm the managing director of a company called Universal Foundation, which is based in Denmark and has traveled quite a long way down the road of commercialization of a new and innovative technology. First of all, I would like to agree with especially Chris. I could see all his 4 lessons learned being very relevant to our experience in Universal Foundation as well. And to put a few more words into it, then What you see here in the big picture is a picture taken from above, from our foundations, which is basically based on a suction bucket. That is the big thing underneath, and then a monopile on top. And this will lead to a more efficient installation process and less weight, and can somehow contribute to taking some of the cost out of the foundation. In most cases, as Chris mentioned, we need to all contribute to take cost out. Universal Foundation was a developing company for the first 10 years, since 2000. Then in 2011, we were acquired, or the majority of the company was acquired by Fred Olsen, which had the power to take the company further. And through the last 5 years since Fred Olsen took over the company, we have been fighting very hard to get the concept into play, into the commercial market. I'll not go through all the details here, but the road to commercialization from us has been 16 years now. The biggest steps being taken during the last 5 years. And as you see in the bottom here, there is a US project which we are very proud to be part of. We have been chosen as the foundation supplier for the LeadCo project in Lake Erie called Icebreaker. And we are working very close with LeadCo to make that project fly at the moment. And it's a very interesting market. And I must say that also from the top management in Fred Olsen, the US market has big attention to us for the same reasons as Chris spoke about. So we are at the moment doing detailed design on the LeadCo project for the Lake Erie foundations. It's 6 foundations, if anyone doesn't know the project. We've done some lessons learned as well along the way through our road to success. I stick to the metaphor of a road. And our first lesson is that when you're dealing with such things as a foundation, it's a big investment. And in offshore wind, it's very cash intensive. You have the cost, the capex first, and then you have the earnings afterwards in the project. So that means that every project needs to go through a bankability check. And when you're a technology company, you tend to believe that technology is everything. When you come into the hand of the banks, the road looks a bit like this. It's a risky place, and you have to be very, very clear on all kind of risk aspects in your product or your service to get through a bankability check. So that was the first lesson learned that I want to bring further on to you listeners. The second lesson learned is that when you're doing products, you can choose to focus on everything and building a very broad company, or you can choose to decide on your core and build that strong. And my general advice would be to decide on the core and build it strong. Because, sorry? No. As Chris said, it is a long road that leads to commercialization, and you're not taking into the industry in a minute. It takes time, and the road tends to be longer than you think it is. And if you bring too much weight, you might lose your energy before you get down that desert road. So focus on the core and focus on building that strong instead of building it wide. That would be my second lesson learned. Then advice number 3, ensure to fuel in due time. It's very cash intensive, this offshore wind business. And our experience, along with others, I think, would be that you need a strong owner to be able to finance both the road to success, but also to withstand the requirements. as both Chris and Willie said, it's a very costful affair if you have anything that doesn't work once it's offshore. So it's important to have a strong balance sheet to withstand those liabilities. And it's especially important to remember to fuel in time if you don't have a strong owner. Then the last lessons learned or advice from Universal Foundation would be maybe the strongest one, at least to us. Every learning is good learning. We know that it sometimes feels very, very bad when you're traveling down the road to commercialization, because you hit all those bumps that you didn't expect to hit. And sometimes you are hit quite hard, and we've been hit quite hard as well. But we have always had one rule of thumb whenever we hit a road bump, and that was to be honest about it and tell the industry not only about the road bumps that we met, but also what we learned from it and how we will prevent ourselves from hitting those road bumps again. We all hit road bumps along the way, and most probably someone will find out anyway. So you might just as well be honest about it and tell the industry, learn from the industry, what could we have done better, what will we do better next time, and get some feedback on that and some dialogue upon it. Because once you are strong enough to do that, you are also strong enough to cope with it and get further down the road afterwards. So those were my four advices, sorry, based on the Universal Foundation experience. And then I would like to thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kristian. So that's all we have time for today. We're running out of time, so we've got to wrap up. This is one of many topics that will be addressed at the Offshore Wind Market Development Conference in Boston this May on the 10th, 11th and 12th. We're expecting around 250 delegates, and we have confirmed support from our sponsors BVG Associates, Fred Olsen, Wind Carrier and Universal Foundation, amongst others. This will be the biggest US offshore wind gathering to date, and if you'd like to learn more about the conference, please visit the website at windenergyupdate.com/offshore-USA. That's windenergyupdate.com/offshore-USA. So many thanks to Chris, Willie and Kristian for participating today. You will all have access to the full audio replay and all of the slides, which I'll send to you in the next week. So thank you very much for tuning in. Goodbye.